for being somebody that never had the aspirations of being an admiral or a flag officer, just to find my niche and enjoy the camaraderie and the people that I associated with, to the point that somebody felt enough and thought enough of me to select me to be part of the Blue Angels was very gratifying. It's amazing 2-year tour. I grew up in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and it's really not the hotbed of the Navy or naval aviation. I was actually in college, and a fraternity brother alumni who had been flying P3s out of Rota, Spain, came back and was in the student union. He was there in his blues and looking swell and everything else, and started talking to a bunch of us about flying for the Navy, and I was pretty intrigued. And before you know it, I was taking the aptitude test, did fairly well on that. And back then, you could have either Naval Academy, Aviation Officer Candidate, or the program that I was in was Aviation Reserve Officer Candidate. It was strictly an aviation program. It was called AVROC for short. The summer of '71, I went down to Pensacola for the first 8 weeks of Aviation Officer Candidate School, which, boy, you're talking about an eye-opener. I never dreamed that Marine Corps drill instructors could be quite the beast that they were. And they take you out on the grinder by the seawall in Pensacola, and up 2, 3, 4 march until you just think you're going to die. But the saving grace during that whole time was, especially on Sunday afternoons late and Sunday evenings, we'd always see the Blues coming back in from their show. And it was so cool to be on that grinder out there, huffing and puffing and marching around, and see the F4s coming back in overhead. But I never dreamed that that was what I could do or one day would do, and it was really amazing. The week that I graduated, I think it was every week or 10 days they had a graduating class, there were 35, 36 people graduating, getting their wings that week, and only 3 got orders to fleet seats, F4s, A6s, or A7s. And you were lucky back then to get orders to be a, what they called a selectively retained graduate. That was what I did, and that was a good set of orders back then. And it was kind of difficult. You did that for 2 years, got a lot of flying experience, teaching new guys how to fly, and we didn't have a whole lot of experience ourselves, but you learn by teaching others. And so it was great for me to get, 1,500, 2,000 hours of flight time. And the recovery rate from surgrads was only about 15%. So out of all those that had gotten orders to be flight instructors, only 15% of us were getting orders back to the fleet. And I fortunately got orders to A7s on the West Coast, and go on to my first tactical squadron, which was VA 56 on USS Midway, which was home ported in Japan at the time. We were in and out of port quite often, and so you always stayed current pretty much for carrier landings, and we just flew a lot. I mean, it was a great experience to be on the Midway in Air Wing 5 for that first tactical tour I had. I was in the ready room about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, just waiting my turn to go fly. And I was reading through one of the Navy publications, and I just happened to stop on the portion that was talking about the Blues accepting submissions, their applications for new pilots for the following year, which would have been the 1980 season. And about that time, our executive officer, Leon Bryant, walked by, and he happened to see what I was reading, and he tapped me on the shoulder and said, you ought to apply for that. I think you'd be good at it. And so that was kind of the impetus to get me thinking about submitting my application for the Blues, which I did, but not getting back to the States until late July, early August. I was only able to make 1, maybe 2 air shows, and so the team didn't have a chance to see me that much and everything else. So didn't get selected for the 80 team, was encouraged to reapply, which I did. In 1981, I was selected to be the left wingman on the team. Your whole world turns blue. Blue flight suits, blue airplanes, blue everything. And you start your training flights, the 1st of December, and boom, your whole world is crazy from there on out. course, at 6'5", when I got in the airplane, I had to run the seat all the way down on the bottom. And then in order to get the canopy closed, I had to turn sideways, reach up, and it was a manual canopy, and had to pull the canopy down. We flew some air shows that were just incredible. My first year, Marine Corps Station in El Toro, the weather had kind of rolled in off the oceans. We were making a big turn out in front of the crowd, and we were all nice and tight in our diamond formation, and we kind of flew through a cloud. There was some rising terrain out there, so as a wingman, you didn't want to know that kind of stuff. You just stayed in tight and hoped the boss knew where he was going. And those are the things that kind of make the hair stand up on the back of your neck, but hey, it's part of it. You got to do what you got to do to get the show in sometimes. In 1982, of course, the typical transition is for the left wingman to move to the slot, especially when you have a first-year boss. You've always got a second-year slot pilot. Big plans going into winter training, and it really came to an unfortunate occurrence. And we're about 3-4 weeks, not even 4 weeks into winter training in January, and the Thunderbirds lose all 4 of their diamond pilots in a mishap in the desert training over by Nellis Air Force Base. So that was a big impact to us. We went to Nellis for the memorial service and came back and just picked right up.
All right, so this is interview with Lieutenant Commander Stu. How do you pronounce it? Powery? Okay. Okay, Stu, as one of the newest members of the Blue Angels.
Actually, it was the day the solos were supposed to join the diamond in winter training. In February, the 3rd week of February of '82, that we lost Stu Powery in the desert. It was just really difficult to deal with. Shortly after the accident, we had to come back to Pensacola, had a memorial service for Stu, and then the boss and I were summoned to Washington, D.C. to go back to the Pentagon. And there was a big push from the congressional side of things to shut both jet demonstration teams down, both the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels. So fortunately, we were able to get back, call Jim Ross back and get him back up to speed. He had been on the team in '79-'80, I believe. And so Jungle came back, fit right in, did an excellent job of getting back up to speed in just a matter of time, because you know, this was the 3rd week of February. Our first air show was the 2nd week of March. The slot pilot is usually, you've got the lead, 2 on the right wing, 3 on the left wing, and the slot pilot out here outboard of number 2 on the right wing. And when you take off in that fingertip formation, well, then the slot makes his move into the slot position. Well, like it normally happens, we had a bar napkin someplace, somewhere along the line, and we started drawing, and the A4, the wingspan was only about 28 feet, 27 and some change, something like that. So we talked about maybe just moving Tim Deneen out a little wider from the boss, still on the same bearing line and everything else, and I would just move in and get right in between the boss's airplane and Tim's airplane. My wingtips were basically hanging in the edge of their exhaust from their engines. But the way the A4 was designed, you could do that. We tried it in winter training, took off, and as we would take off and get airborne, Tim and I would just very gradually move in, and it's almost like you would have a diamond formation lifting off the runway. I remember Scott Anderson saying, "How do I narrate this non-move to the slot?" It was kind of a break from tradition, and the hit's on me for doing that. Kevin Miller, once he moved to the slot, went back to the traditional way of getting from the right outpost into the slot position on takeoff. We were going to go to Japan and do about a 2.5-3 week tour of Japan and the Far East. We were all excited about it. Was going to be for the '82 season. It looked like it was going to come to fruition. And then about that time, there were terrorist activities that finally started popping up all over the world, and then it was kind of a tennis match between the State Department and the Department of the Navy as to whether we're going to go or not go, and then finally they just said, we can't run the risk of having those assets that far away for that long a period of time, so we didn't get to do that. Although we did do Hawaii, we did about 2 weeks at Kaneohe Bay and Hickam Air Force Base. We had 2 KC-135 tankers that we were tanking off of. Took off out of California, tanking all the way across the Pacific. Scott developed a pressurization problem, so we gave him one of the KC-135s and him alone, and he dropped down to 10,000 feet, and for the last 2.5 hours of the flight, flew into Hickam Air Force Base, low altitude, so he'd be below the 10,000 foot, oxygen requirement and that sort of thing. To stand at the crowd line after an air show and have your handful of your little trifold Blue Angel, this is who we are, this is what we do, and sign autographs for the kids. You don't know it at the time, but if you just happen to strike a chord or touch the heart of one of those youngsters, boy or girl, that could grow up and not necessarily indicate that everybody can be a Blue Angel or everybody can be a Navy pilot, but just a military career in general. The end of the season in '82, we shake hands and it's all over and we're done, and the new guys are there, they're ready to take over. They're already taking your nameplate off the parking spot on the side of the hangar so you can get out of there, and they can park next to the hangar and that sort of thing. It's just nostalgic. It was a great 2 years, had some very turbulent times, had some great times. It's just something to look back on and cherish forever.